Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. There is a lot that happens this week, so settle in. We're just gonna get straight into it. What do the Oromo, Palestinian, and Aboriginal people of Canada all have in common? We are all Indigenous to our regions, yet oppressed in our own homes. I'm going to briefly summarize the history of all three groups, starting with Palestine. Basically, Palestine existed. And then after World War II, a lot of Jewish people migrated to Palestine. In 1948, they decided to declare that they were now a country, the country of Israel, even though that area was already a country, the country of Palestine. And with United Nations involvement, with support from the United States, President Harry Truman, the Jewish people in that area were able to do so. Israel essentially planted a flag on Palestinian soil and said, "This is now mine." Obviously, the Palestinians fought against the Jews and lost. There has been unrest and oppression ever since. Most recently, with Israel's plans to annex 30 to 40% of Palestine's West Bank, local activists where I'm from held a protest.
Well, they are, and they're here today, and every one of us are with them.
On to Oromiya. Oromo people are native to our region of East Africa, which is the majority and central part of modern-day Ethiopia. Between the 16th and 19th century, wars between the Oromo people and the Amhara people devastated both groups. The Amhara were native to the central highland plateaus of modern-day Ethiopia. The wars ultimately led to the Amhara people having political control over modern-day Ethiopia, including modern-day Eritrea, which has since become its own country, just as the Oromo people would like to do with their native land. On June 29th, distinguished Oromo activist, leader, and singer Hachalu Hundessa was shot outside of the capital Addis Ababa. While very disheartening, his death has led to protests across the world, including one in my hometown.
Hajalun nam tokko miti. Hajalun ija Oromoti. Hajalu dhabuun anaaf jireenya dhabuudha. Haa ta'u jireenya asirratti murama jechuudha miti. Itti fufa jireenya.
Now on to Indigenous people in Canada. Aboriginal people in Canada, or should I say Turtle Island, are native to their land, having lived here for more than 14,000 years. When European settlers came to Turtle Island and made establishments in the 17th and 18th century, Indigenous livelihoods were forever changed. Broken friendship treaties, residential schools, and genocide were some of the atrocities directed towards Indigenous people by white settlers. In fact, our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, said, and I quote, "The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian people in all respects with the other inhabitants of the Dominion as speedily as they are fit to change." So my general topic for this video is to reflect on what it means to be Indigenous, as well as what it means to be a first-generation Canadian in light of Indigenous issues here in Canada, as well as Indigenous issues in Palestine, Oromiya, and across the world. Being Indigenous not only means being the first people to populate an area, it also means the creation of a strong culture formed around survival. It means creating an ever-evolving language to be able to communicate and express oneself with the group, creating frameworks to understand the natural world around us, creating medicines and forms of healing, structures of government, and ways of life. Being Indigenous means all this generational wisdom exists in your heritage, not for 153 years, but for centuries and millenniums. It also means ownership of your home. Imagine if someone came to your house, stuck a flag in the ground, and was like, "This is now my house." Does that mean that it is no longer yours? No. Then why did that happen in Palestine, Oromiya, and Turtle Island? Now, I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents immigrated to Canada from Oromiya due to a civil war in Ethiopia. And I can tell you from experience that the likely only people happier about being Canadian than white Canadians themselves are immigrants. Because immigrating to Canada is a big deal for people who are likely escaping difficult circumstances back home. And that's something I will credit Canada for, as a place where one can gain citizenship and be accepted into a country in theory. Because most countries, you can live there your whole life and never gain citizenship unless you marry in. And there are even countries where even if you do marry in, you don't get citizenship. But think about it. Yes, Canada does let people immigrate here and eventually let them apply for citizenship. But isn't every single non-Aboriginal Canadian to this day an immigrant, either first, second, third, or fourth, or fifth generation. The idea that my parents and my parents' friends have that Canada has done them such a favor by allowing them to immigrate here and become Canadian, I think it misses one thing. This idea misses the fact that every single person who lives here, at some point in their ancestry, did the exact same thing. Canada has only been a country for 153 years. So if you're not Aboriginal, 153 years ago, your family was something else. Also, as first-generation Canadians, should we be proud to be living in this country? A country that asks us to assimilate, fit in, face discrimination for being different. So we change our identity to fit in, even though we know that we don't truly belong here and our culture isn't hockey, maple syrup, and poutine. Remember those heritage minutes that are like, this is a part of your heritage, and they're always like bringing up some racist moment in Canadian history? Of course, there are things to be proud of about being Canadian. Free healthcare. I posed a few questions on my Instagram at Khadija Bawaji. I asked, how should we navigate our Canadian identity in light of Indigenous issues? And how do instances of oppression that we may be more familiar with inform how we view the oppression of other groups? I think a lot of immigrants come from places where there is political tension between two groups, the oppressor and the oppressed. And we think that when we come to a place like Canada with its multiculturalism and its friendliness, that we're leaving that behind. But we're not. I will never be affected by the situation in Palestine or Indigenous issues here in Canada or even the situation in my own home country. But of course, the fact that it's my own people gives it a personal element. Being Oromo and hearing about the situation at home is difficult, especially knowing that there's not much more I can do but spread awareness. And I think that layer of helplessness unites a lot of first-generation Canadians. We all wish we could do more, and I think that's why solidarity is so important, especially for us youth, because we may not be in the positions to enact massive change, but there is so much more we can do together than alone. The same way that oppression towards our ethnic group affects us is the same way that it affects other people that come from groups that are oppressed. That's why it is very important to empathize and recognize that we live in a country that tries to hide its oppression of its own Indigenous people. And while we've been spoon-fed this narrative since preschool about Canada's multiculturalism, that is not the full story. So yes, we're Canadian legally, but we're also living on Turtle Island. We should learn about Indigenous culture, history, and oppression. Because when our parents immigrated here, that is the heritage that we gained and the narrative that we must contend with. On to my last question on if I celebrate Canada Day. This year, however, I chose not to celebrate Canada Day and to go to protests instead. In fact, the only reason I saw fireworks this year was accidentally on our way to Meza. Did you know that Heritage Minutes began because 1/4 of Canadians can't name a Canadian event or achievement that they are proud of? This strengthens the fact that I think that most people who celebrate Canada Day don't even know why it's celebrated. And I'm sure I learned it at some point in social studies, but it's beyond me, like I literally don't remember. And I wasn't gonna search it up just to look like I knew things for this video. Realistically, for most people, Canada Day is just a day off, an opportunity to get the family and friend group together, have fun, and enjoy watching some fireworks. And we could do that any day of the year. So why don't we? Why don't we change it? Clearly, Canada Day has strong negative connotations, and it's a day that upsets many Indigenous people. So why don't we change the day to a day that has great significance to Indigenous people and call it another name, maybe Turtle Island Day, and have municipalities invest into it to the same extent that they do Canada Day. Have that be a day off work, have that be a day to enjoy with community, with events, performers, and fireworks, and give 1/4 of Canadians something to be proud of. So no ill will to anyone who does celebrate Canada Day. As you've seen earlier, that was me. I can admit it's essentially just a day of free fun, but if you live in this country, I implore you to learn about Indigenous issues, because that is your heritage. Not hockey, poutine, and maple syrup, which actually was invented by Indigenous people. Fun fact. So I guess it is a part of our heritage. That's it for this week, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I drop videos every Sunday, so make sure to subscribe. If you're wondering why I'm wearing cultural clothing today, tune in next week. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next Sunday. There are things to be proud about being Canadian.